Now, U.S. President Donald Trump's pick for a commerce secretary said that U.S. tariffs could ramp up in 2 phases. Howard Lutnick told his Senate confirmation hearing the first phase is an emergency action to deal with the fentanyl crisis and could kick in on Saturday. In response, British Columbia now has a new war room committee. That is according to the provincial government. Premier David Eby says he formed it to protect BC's economy from the ongoing tariff threat from the U.S. The cabinet committee has a 3-point strategy in response. And joining us now is BC's new war room minister, Provincial Housing and Municipal Affairs Minister Ravi Kahlon joins us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time with us. How prepared is the BC government for these tariffs to come into effect as early as Saturday?
Well, the challenge here, Stephen, is that no jurisdiction can be fully prepared for when their strongest ally decides they're going to turn on them and put significant tariffs across the board. I don't think any British Columbia or Canadian imagined that we'd be at a day where a new president would come in and say that Canada is now all of a sudden a threat to them when we've been their strongest ally. And I would say that the biggest challenge that leaders across the country are having is trying to figure out why this is even happening. First, it was told to us that it was because fentanyl was crossing the border. U.S. Border Services has their data for the last 3 years up on their website showing that 1% of the fentanyl coming into the U.S. is coming across the Canadian border. And now I agree 1% is even too much, and that should be addressed. And I know the federal government is ramping that up even more than it was before, but it doesn't really justify full 25% tariffs that will impact communities on both sides of the border. We heard second from them that it was trade imbalances. Well, the only reason why there's a trade imbalance is because they need our oil, and it helps them produce low-cost items. And then lastly, we've heard it's territorial expansion, and there's no way in hell that Canada is becoming the 51st state of the U.S. And so here we are. We have to find a path forward. And the Premier's asked all of cabinet ministers to do three things. One, figure out a path for how we respond. Second, how we can strengthen our local economies, produce more things locally. And lastly, identify new markets so that we can diversify where our trade goes to.
And what BC businesses and industries are at the highest risk if those tariffs are imposed?
Well, the impact will be, quite frankly, across the board, but it will be greater in places where we're directly selling products to the U.S. So in some cases, it's building materials. You've got lots of food processing. I mean, food goes. A blueberry can go across the border and come back and go back across the border for processing. And so the impacts are everywhere. And the challenge for us is we don't exactly know where they want to start their tariffs. They keep hinting at a various amount of things. So the challenge for us, not only BC, but for across Canada, is we need to have a Canadian response. It can't be each province doing their own thing.
Right.
We've been having that conversation with all the premiers across the country.
So I mentioned a 3-step plan. Just give me the highlights of that plan. What is the 3-step plan to fight tariffs?
Well, right now we have got some items that are being discussed by the premiers on what we respond to, what level of response would happen according to what the U.S. does. And of course, it'll vary. The second is the work around strengthening our local economy. So, Minister Popham is looking at how do we produce enough food? Food is going to be a major issue, Stephen, going forward. Not only because of tariffs, but also because the U.S. moved to deport migrants, which quite frankly are producing majority of the food in the U.S. And that will have price impacts. You could see the U.S. say, we're not going to have food going outside the country. And that would have a major impact on British Columbia. So food, how do we heat our homes? How do we expand opportunities to export our products outside the country? And then what countries? We've got historic relationships with Asian partners. We have to strengthen our partners with Vietnam and Mexico and other South American partners. So a lot of work. It's going to be all hands on deck.
And what is on the table for BC to retaliate with if it comes to countermeasures?
Well, I can't comment on that right now, partly because it has to be a Canadian response, and I'm not going to get ahead of where the Premier is with all of his colleagues across the country. But what I can say is that we are looking at everything. Everything is on the table. Minister Brenda Bailey is looking at it from a finance perspective. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but it's going to require, again, a Team Canada approach, and we're all in from British Columbia. We're going to support not only people here locally, but we're keen to support our other provinces during this challenging time.
Minister, we'll leave it there this morning. Thank you for the time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Stephen.
All right, take care. That is Ravi Kahlon, Housing Minister and Municipal Affairs Minister, also now in charge of the new war room that's been established by BC Premier David Eby to look at tariffs that could be imposed by the United States as early as this Saturday.